Christmas Eve. A lonely single dad steps into the night not knowing that in a matter of minutes his life will collide with a truth so heartbreaking it will leave him utterly stunned. The bitter wind cuts through the empty street, the sky painted in black ice and flickering street lamps. And there by the dumpster he sees her tiny hands rifling through garbage, searching for scraps. A child. Hungry. Desperate. What happens next will change everything for both of them. Follow my story to the end, and don't forget to comment the city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story travels. The night pressed against Ethan Cole like an unwelcome weight. He pulled his coat tighter across his chest as his boots crunched over the thin frost blanketing the pavement. His keys jingled in his hand, a small metallic reminder of the routine he'd lived for too long. Another shift at the security firm, another night where silence and loneliness were his only companions. It was 11:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve. The rest of the city had retreated indoors to twinkling lights and warm living rooms, but Ethan's apartment building stood dark, the only sound the faint whistle of wind pushing against broken gutters. He reached the curb, his mind already drifting to the endless hours of sterile hallways and buzzing fluorescent lights. But then movement. Out of the corner of his eye near the dumpsters at the edge of the lot, something shifted. Ethan slowed, squinting through the icy air. At first he thought it was a stray cat, maybe a raccoon bold enough to rummage through human scraps. But as his eyes adjusted, his heart jolted in his chest. It wasn't an animal. It was a child. Her frame was so small, so thin, that at first glance she could have been mistaken for a shadow. Her knees bent awkwardly as she dug through plastic bags, her trembling fingers sorting through empty food containers and crumpled fast food wrappers. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had done this before. Ethan's breath caught. His legs carried him forward before his mind had even caught up. "Hey there," he called gently, his voice softened by instinct. The girl's head snapped up, wide brown eyes flashing with terror. In her small hands she clutched a half-eaten sandwich mold creeping along one corner. Her knuckles whitened around it as if he might take it away. "Easy," Ethan said quickly, raising his hands, palms up in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to hurt you." She didn't move. Every muscle in her body seemed ready to spring to bolt into the dark. Her chest rose and fell in frantic bursts. She looked so much older in her fear than her years suggested. The glow of a flickering streetlight caught her face. Her cheeks were hollow. Her lips cracked her tangled hair, spilling over a purple jacket 2 sizes too big. The jacket swallowed her, hanging off her small shoulders like a hand-me-down from another life. Ethan lowered himself to one knee, making himself smaller, less threatening. The frosted pavement bit through his jeans, but he ignored it. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked softly. The girl's lips parted, but no sound came out. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, in the faintest whisper, she answered, "Lila." Ethan repeated it slowly, careful to cradle the name in warmth. "Lila. That's beautiful." "I'm Ethan." He tried a small smile, one he hadn't felt in years, the kind that cracked through the heaviness sitting on his chest. Lila's eyes flickered uncertain. "Are you looking for something specific?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Her grip on the sandwich tightened. She swallowed hard, her voice barely rising above the wind. "Food." The single word struck Ethan like a punch to the gut. His throat tightened, his chest heavy with an ache he hadn't felt in years. "No child should be searching for food in a dumpster," he murmured, half to himself, half to her. "Not on Christmas Eve, not ever." He hesitated, then asked, "Where are your parents, Lila?" The question drained the color from her face. She looked down, shoulders trembling. "I don't—" Her voice cracked, words spilling like broken glass. "I don't have any." Ethan's breath stilled in his chest. And in that frozen moment under the broken streetlight on Christmas Eve, something inside him shifted. A dormant instinct buried beneath 3 years of grief and silence stirred awake. The instinct of a father. He hadn't felt it since the day he lost everything. Since the day his world collapsed in the sterile white halls of a hospital, leaving him a hollow man. Now staring at this trembling child clutching garbage for survival, that instinct roared back with a force that nearly brought him to his knees. He leaned forward, voice low, steady. "You're not alone anymore, Lila," he said. "Not tonight." The girl's eyes darted up, disbelief swimming in them. Adults had lied before. They had promised safety and left her broken. But something in Ethan's voice, something raw, honest, unguarded, made her pause. The December wind howled through the alley, whipping her tangled hair across her face. She shivered violently, but she didn't run. And for the first time that night, Ethan felt hope stir in the cold. He extended a hand. "Come with me. We'll get you warm. We'll get you fed." Lila's small fingers twitched. The sandwich trembled in her grip. Her eyes searched his face, looking for the trick, the lie, the betrayal she had come to expect. But she found only sincerity in his weary gaze. She didn't take his hand, not yet. But she didn't run either. And for Ethan Cole, that was enough to begin. Tosin. The frost cracked beneath his boots as he stood waiting. Christmas lights blinked dimly in the distance from another building, their cheer a cruel contrast to the emptiness around them. He had walked into the night, expecting nothing but routine, nothing but loneliness. Instead, he had found a little girl named Lila, searching through trash, searching for survival. And deep down, though, he didn't know it yet, searching for him. The air between them hung heavy, brittle as ice. Ethan didn't move, didn't push. He knew if he reached too quickly, she would scatter into the night like a startled bird, and he might never see her again. His heart thudded hard in his chest, the cold air burning in his lungs as he stayed crouched in front of the dumpster, hands open, showing her he meant no harm. Lila's small frame was taut with fear, her wide eyes darting to the dark alley behind her measuring escape. She clutched the filthy sandwich like it was gold, pressing it to her chest, as though it was the last piece of security she had in the world. Ethan's voice softened even further. "You don't have to be afraid of me, Lila. I promise." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "People, they always say that." The words were barely audible, but they cut straight through him. He had no answer for the truth in them, only a quiet ache in his chest. "You're right," he said after a long pause. "People say a lot of things, but I'm not here to make promises I can't keep. I just don't want you out here in the cold tonight." Lila blinked, her breath fogging in small bursts. She was trying to judge him, weighing his words with a wariness far beyond her years. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant sound of a car passing its headlights, sweeping across the cracked asphalt before disappearing. Finally, she spoke again, her voice tiny but firm. "Why do you care?" The question caught him off guard. Why did he care? He could have kept walking. He could have gotten in his car, driven off to his lonely shift, and convinced himself it wasn't his problem. That would have been easier, safer. But something in the way she stood there, small, fragile, yet unflinching, ignited something long buried within him. He felt the same crushing loneliness, the same ache of being left behind, and he couldn't bear the thought of a child enduring it alone. He exhaled slowly, his breath clouding in the frozen air. Because no one should ever have to do this by themselves, especially not a kid. Her eyes softened just barely. A flicker, then gone again, replaced with suspicion. "You'll tell the police? Or people who take kids away?" Ethan shook his head. "Not unless you want me to. Right now, all I want is to make sure you're warm and safe." "That's it." For a moment, she said nothing. Then, almost imperceptibly, her shoulders slumped. The fight in her seemed to drain, though her small hands still clung to the sandwich. Ethan slowly rose to his feet, careful not to tower over her, giving her space. "It's freezing out here, Lila. My place is just upstairs. I've got heat food. You don't even have to talk to me if you don't want to. Just come in from the cold." She studied him for a long time, her gaze searching every line of his face. She was looking for cracks, for danger, for lies, for all the things the world had already shown her too many times. Her lips trembled. She wanted to believe him, but belief had cost her too much already. "I don't know you," she whispered. "I know," Ethan said quietly. "And you don't have to trust me yet. But let me help you tonight. Just tonight. No strings." Her breathing quickened uneven. She took a tiny step back, then froze, torn between instinct and need. The wind gusted, suddenly tugging at her jacket, and she shivered so hard her teeth chattered. Ethan saw it, the exhaustion behind her eyes, the hunger trembling through her thin frame. Survival screamed at her not to trust him, but her body betrayed the truth she couldn't do this much longer. Finally, with trembling hands, she nodded once. Ethan felt relief wash through him, though he kept his expression calm. "Okay," he said gently. "That's good. Come on." We'll take it slow." She hesitated, then followed as he led the way toward the stairwell of his building. Her small footsteps echoed faintly behind him, each one a fragile step across the invisible bridge of trust she was forcing herself to walk. When they reached the doorway, Ethan pulled out his keys, glancing back at her. She lingered at the threshold, her hand tightening around the moldy sandwich. "You can keep it," he said softly, nodding toward it. "But I've got better food inside." Her eyes darted to him, then back to the hallway, dimly lit by buzzing fluorescent bulbs. Slowly, cautiously, she stepped inside. As the door closed behind them, shutting out the howl of the December wind, Ethan felt the weight of what had just happened. A child alone on Christmas Eve had chosen to follow him. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, didn't know how he could possibly fix the brokenness that had led her here. But in that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was that she wasn't outside anymore. She wasn't alone in the cold. And for Ethan Cole, that was the only promise he needed to keep tonight. The hallway smelled faintly of bleach and old heat, the kind that clicks in tired buildings and never quite catches up with winter. Ethan walked ahead without crowding her, letting Lila keep 3 careful steps of space. The fluorescent tube above them hummed like a held breath. It reminded him of another hallway, another hum, another night when everything that mattered went quiet. He opened his apartment and stepped aside. Lila hovered at the threshold, eyes sweeping the frame, the lock, the route back to the stairs, as if sketching an escape map she might need. He knew that map. He'd lived with it too. He kept his tone soft. "You can come in," he said. "You don't have to take off your shoes." She crossed the line like someone testing thin ice. The door eased shut and the outside sounds fell away. Inside the room made small noises, fridge hum, radiator, knocked the soft tick of a clock. Memory rose. It had been raining the morning Rachel went into labor. Not a storm, just the steady gray wash that smudges a city. He'd spilled coffee because his hands shook. Rachel pressed his cheek and grinned. "It's okay, rookie. We're just having a baby, not defusing a bomb." He packed the bag, soft socks, a Motown playlist, the strawberry newborn hat her sister mailed. The nursery wore a buttery yellow because Rachel said it would hold light like a bowl. She taped paper stars to the ceiling. "For nights we need to remember the sky," she said. At the hospital, the lights were the same in different color as the one now buzzing above his sink. Nurses moved with practiced kindness. He kissed her forehead and promised foolish promises. Dishes, midnight shifts, a crib he'd rebuild twice. Then the beeps sped up. Words fell like tools deceleration's distress emergency. A nurse guided him out with a hand both firm and kind. "We've got her," she said. The door closed. Hospitals keep a silence for men told to wait while love walks a wire. He bargained with luck and weather. "Take the car," he whispered. "Take the job. Don't take them." The door opened and the doctor delivered an earthquake in quiet words. "Complications rare we tried. I'm sorry." Sorry sounded too small under those lights. He reached for Rachel's hand and found only his sleeve. After the casseroles and awkward visits, after people stopped calling because they didn't know what to say, he closed the nursery door. He meant to paint over the yellow and couldn't. When the lease ran out, he moved to a one-bedroom with creaking floors and a view of a brick wall, because walls don't surprise you. He practiced being small. Friends like Michael called in careful voices for a while. Even care thinned like sideways rain. Days became lists. Nights were blank walks in his head. On good mornings, grief felt like a backpack. On bad ones, like the floor had been replaced with water. He learned to answer, "How are you?" with hanging in, because it invited nothing back. Now a small girl stood in his kitchen doorway holding a moldy sandwich like a passport. He knew hunger, not just the stomach kind. He knew the posture of someone who didn't expect good to last. "Water?" he asked. Lila nodded, one precise dip, the yes of someone who suspects a price. He slid a glass across the counter slow enough not to startle. She reached with both hands as if using one might make it disappear. She drank without tilting back, guarding even her throat. The apartment looked different with another breath in it. The gray couch, chosen to be forgettable, now looked like a bad alibi. The plant on the sill leaned toward the streetlight, as if begging for a kinder moon. He saw the absence of photographs, the strict tidiness he'd called practical. He understood it for what it was, a life designed to leave no evidence. Thank you, Lila whispered, voice creaky from disuse. You're welcome. He nodded toward the thing in her hands. You can set it down if you want. There's better food than that. If I put it down, someone might take it. Nobody will take it here. She didn't move. Not Defiance policy. He accepted the rule. Okay, keep it. We'll add to it. Ethan set a folded towel on the table like a placemat for a treaty neither had signed. You can sit. Or stand. Whatever feels better. She perched on the chair's edge, the way you sit on the edge of a world that's thrown you too many times. Do you have anyone I should call? He asked carefully. Anyone worrying about you? Her fingers squeezed the bread. A small shake of her head. Okay, he said again, and the word took on weight. It wasn't built to carry. He turned the stove on gently, set a pot to warm pulled bread from the bag. The scrape of butter across a knife felt ceremonial. If love has 1,000 names, vow ring promise. Maybe another is steam rising for someone who hasn't been warm in too long. A memory surfaced the counseling session Michael arranged. The soft-voiced woman said, "Grief is work. Let it speak without letting it decide." He hadn't gone back. He said he couldn't afford it. Really, he couldn't afford to be witnessed. Now a child sat at his table, and he was witnessed anyway by the outline of his emptiness mirrored in her hunger. He realized with the clarity that follows numbness that he had been waiting, not for Rachel to return or the yellow room to become promise again, waiting for something to ask him to be large. He set an empty plate near her hand. Tomato soup. Okay? I can make grilled cheese. It's not fancy. She glanced at the pot, then at him. Okay. He buttered bread. The pan took heat. The apartment gathered a softer smell. She still hadn't taken off her jacket. He let it be. People set down armor when they decide they can survive the sound it makes. He turned the sandwich and watched butter blister at the edges. I'm Ethan, he said, remembering he'd told her already, but wanting to give the name a second landing. If you want to call me anything else, you can. Her mouth twitched like a thought brushed it. Ethan is fine. Okay. He managed a small smile. Ethan is fine. The questions who, where, how long waited on his tongue. He would ask them gently, but not yet. First warmth. First taste. First proof the night would not swallow them whole. Steam rose from the pot. He poured carefully the soup, his soft red mirror catching kitchen light. He set the bowl on the towel square and slid the plate beside it. The grilled cheese came last, golden and imperfect. He cut it into quarters because quarters look like abundance. Careful. It's hot, he said. She tested with a fingertip blue. Softly took a bite so small it seemed like practice. Her eyes closed. A tiny crease left her forehead. I can make more, he said, and felt foolish and also right. She nodded without looking up. Okay. He tried to see the room from where she sat. Clean counters, blank walls, one plant leaning toward borrowed light. He wanted to apologize for the absence of pictures and for the years they represented. Instead, he let the quiet be a blanket, not a gap. They ate their first small minutes of almost peace. He didn't know about the calls he'd make later, or the forms, or the way a courtroom can feel like Cliff and Bridge at once. He only knew that once under humming lights he'd begged for 2 lives and received none. And now, under another hum, a child sat at his table, and there was something he could give. The sandwich hissed at the second flip. Lila watched him not like a rabbit watching a fox, but like a traveler watching a horizon to see if the storm was coming in or clearing out. Almost ready, he said. Her shoulders dropped a fraction like a bird settling one wing. The hallway light clicked off and on outside his door. Somewhere in him a door did the same. He did not step through it yet, but the latch had finally lifted. The second grilled cheese hissed in the pan, and for a moment Ethan let the small, ordinary sound hold the room together. But silence never stays neutral for long. It bends toward memory, toward the things unsaid. He turned the sandwich, and the smell of butter filled the air. But in his head, the hospital machines were still beeping, the yellow nursery still glowing faint in the dark. Do you live here by yourself? Lila asked suddenly. Her voice was cautious but curious, like she wasn't sure if the question was allowed. Ethan looked up startled. He cleared his throat. Yeah. Just me. She nodded slowly, chewing another corner of bread. She didn't push. Children like her knew better than to ask too much. But something in her eyes said she wanted to understand why a grown man would be sitting alone on Christmas Eve offering soup to a stranger. He set the sandwich halves on her plate, the golden crust steaming. "Eat as much as you want. There's more in the pan." She studied the food as if it might vanish if she touched it too quickly. Then she picked up a quarter and took a cautious bite. Her shoulders eased just slightly. Ethan sat across from her, his hands folded. Watching her eat stirred something raw in him, like the first stretch of a muscle gone stiff. It was relief, but also grief. 3 years ago, this kitchen had been different. He and Rachel had dreamed of a house, with more space, a backyard where their son could learn to ride a bike. They'd bought secondhand furniture and painted walls together, laughing at the splatters in each other's hair. Her laugh. That sound had carried him through night shifts and bills, through worries about whether he'd make a good father. She had always believed in him more than he believed in himself. And then March rained the drive to the hospital, Rachel's hand gripping his, squeezing through contractions. Her whispered jokes, her smile even in pain. He'd thought they had time. He remembered pacing the waiting room phone, buzzing with messages from friends. "You got this, man. Can't wait to meet him." He remembered pressing his hand to the nursery paint swatches tucked in his pocket, nervous and proud. And then eyes that couldn't meet his voices, using words he still hated, complications. Hemorrhage. We tried. In an hour, the world had gone hollow. The yellow nursery never held a child. The strawberry hat stayed folded in a drawer. And Ethan, who had walked into the hospital ready to become a father, walked out a ghost. His chest ached even now, watching Lila bite into warm bread, like she wasn't sure she deserved it. The weight of loss pressed hard, but something else moved with it. A pull sharp and unexpected. "Where are your parents, Lila?" he asked quietly, though the question felt dangerous. Her chewing slowed. She placed the sandwich back on the plate, her small fingers trembling. Her eyes dropped to her lap. I don't have any," she whispered. The words were fragile, almost lost in the hum of the radiator, but they hit Ethan like a crack of thunder. He leaned forward, slightly gentler now. "What do you mean?" She shifted as if bracing herself against his gaze. "I was living with my grandma. Her name was Ruth." Her voice quivered, but she kept talking as though if she stopped, she'd never be able to start again. "She was all I had after my mama left. I was a baby then." Ethan's throat tightened. "And your grandma? What happened to her?" "She got sick 3 weeks ago." Lila's words tumbled out faster now, like she was trying to outrun the hurt. She had this cough that wouldn't go away. She was tired all the time. We didn't have money for doctors, so she just took medicine from the store. Then, one morning, she didn't wake up. The last words broke apart in a sob. Lila pressed her hands to her face, her shoulders shaking. Ethan's chest constricted. He knew that morning, that moment when you shake someone, beg them to wake, knowing deep down they won't. He knew the crushing silence when uniforms come, when strangers take away the body of the person who was your whole world. Lila sniffled, struggling to keep her voice steady. "They said I had to go to new families, but none of them wanted me. They kept moving me around, and the last people, they didn't care. So I left. I thought maybe if I came back here, maybe Ruth would come home too." Her small frame shook with tears. Ethan's vision blurred, the sting sharp and merciless. He saw himself again standing alone in that hospital parking lot, the world moving around him while his future disintegrated. She was 7 years old, 7, and already she carried the same hollow loneliness he had carried for years. "Lila," he said softly, his voice thick. "How long have you been out here?" She rubbed her sleeve across her wet cheeks. 2 days. 2 days. In December. Alone. Ethan pressed a hand to his forehead, steadying himself. The clock on the wall read 12:03 a.m. Christmas morning. He looked back at her. Her small body curled in the oversized jacket, and he knew this night wasn't coincidence. "Listen to me," he said, leaning closer, his voice firm but gentle. "You don't have to do this alone anymore. Not tonight. Not ever again." Her eyes searched his, wary and worn, looking for the cracks in his promise. She had been failed too many times. But something in his voice, something raw, unpolished, painfully real, seemed to reach her. For the first time since she walked into his apartment, her small shoulders relaxed. Just a little. But enough. Ethan sat back exhaling. He hadn't expected this night to change him. He hadn't expected to feel that old buried instinct pulse through his veins again. But it was here, alive. And as Lila lifted the sandwich again with trembling hands, Ethan realized he had already made his decision. This child was not going back to the cold, not while he still had breath in his body. The wind rattled the window panes as if demanding to be let in, but the apartment held its warmth like a fragile secret. Ethan sat across from Lila, watching her chew in silence. Every bite seemed calculated, as though she feared the food might vanish before she finished it. He noticed the way she glanced toward the door, the way her body leaned as if ready to run at the first sign of threat. He recognized that posture. He had lived in it himself, though his hiding place had been grief instead of alleys. "You don't have to hurry," he said gently. "There'll always be more food here." Her eyes lifted, suspicious. "Always, always." His answer came firm, steady, like a rope cast across water. She stared at him for a long moment, searching for the crack in his words. But she found only a man whose weariness matched her own. Slowly, she took another bite, not rushed this time. When she finished the sandwich and soup, Ethan collected the plates. The clink of ceramic in the sink felt like punctuation. He turned to her, choosing his next words carefully. "Lila, I know you don't trust grown-ups right now. You've got every reason not to, but I need you to hear me. I'm not going anywhere." Her lips pressed together, trembling. That's what they all said. The words stabbed deeper than any accusation. Ethan crouched again, bringing himself level with her. His knees ached against the floor, but he stayed there. "I can't change what they did," he admitted, his voice raw. "But I can promise you this. Tonight you are safe. You're not out in the cold. You're not alone, and I'm not walking away." Her brown eyes shimmered, full of doubt and longing. She wanted to believe him, but belief was dangerous. It had cost her too much already. Ethan reached into the hall closet, pulling out a spare blanket. He laid it across the couch. "You can sleep here tonight. No one will bother you. And in the morning, we'll figure out the rest. Together." She stayed frozen for a moment, then whispered, "Why?" "Because no child should have to go through what you've been through. And because—" He paused, swallowing against the lump in his throat. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything, and I can't watch you carry that alone." He didn't tell her that this was the first time in 3 years he had said those words aloud. He didn't tell her that seeing her shivering by the dumpster had cracked something open inside him, something he thought had died with Rachel and their baby. Instead, he tucked the blanket around her shoulders. Her tiny frame disappeared beneath it, but he could see her eyes soften just slightly as warmth seeped into her bones. The clock ticked past 1 in the morning, Christmas Day. Ethan sat in the armchair across the room, watching over her as she shifted beneath the blanket. The city outside was silent, as if holding its breath. "Ethan," her small voice broke the quiet. "Yeah, will you still be here when I wake up?" His chest tightened. He leaned forward, his voice steady. "Yes, I'll be here." She studied his face one last time, then curled into the couch cushion. Her breathing slowed, though every few minutes she stirred, clutching the blanket like a lifeline. Ethan stayed awake, the hum of the radiator filling the silence. He stared at the ceiling, thoughts racing. He knew the system would never make this easy. He knew he couldn't just keep a child without the law demanding its due. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was that she was here, safe, breathing evenly, alive. And for the first time since that night in the hospital, Ethan felt something stir inside him that wasn't grief. It was purpose, the kind that made his hands itch to build, to protect, to fight. He whispered to the shadows, to himself as much as to her, "I won't let you down, Lila. Not like everyone else." The radiator clicked off, leaving a hush so complete he could hear her breathing. Ethan leaned back, eyes heavy, but his resolve sharper than it had been in years. This girl had walked into his night by chance, but he knew now she wasn't leaving it, not if he had any say. Dawn bled into the room in a pale pewter wash. Ethan jerked awake in the armchair, a blanket halfway down his legs and a crick in his neck. For a second, he didn't know why he'd slept sitting up, why the air smelled faintly of butter and tomato, why the room felt like it was holding its breath. Then the couch rustled. Lila sat up so fast the blanket slid to the floor. Her eyes went wide to find him there exactly where he'd promised. In one quick flash, he saw Flight Doubt Hope wrestling in the same small space. "Morning," he said softer than he expected. "I'm still here." She stared another second, then nodded once, as if checking a box only she could see. "It's morning." "Christmas morning," he said. "You slept a few hours." "You want breakfast?" Ethan asked. "I can do oatmeal, or eggs, or my pancakes are not award-winning, but they're round." "Mostly." A flicker lifted the corner of her mouth and was gone. "Oatmeal," she murmured. "Deal, pot, water, stove." The ordinary choreography felt like laying track one piece at a time. He found raisins and a drizzle of honey he'd used twice in a year. Behind him, the couch springs gave a small complaint. Lila had her feet tucked under her but hadn't taken off the purple jacket. He pretended not to see the way her fingers checked the pocket like a guard touching a latch. "Bathroom's down the hall," he said, stirring. "Clean towels in the cabinet. If you want to warm up more, you can take a bath." "You don't have to. Just, the option's there." Her eyes darted to the hallway, then back to him. She didn't move. "I can set the towels on the heater so they're warm," he added. "Okay," she whispered, which in her language might have meant maybe later. Oates hissed softly. "Do you like cinnamon?" he asked. "I can go easy." "I like it," she said, and something eased in his chest. When the oatmeal thickened, he ladled into bowls and brought them to the table. He sat and waited before touching his spoon. She watched him for the script, then mirrored it. Tiny bite test. Heat. Second bite, bigger. Honey shone on her lip. She scrubbed it with her sleeve and froze. He handed her a napkin. "These are allowed here." She folded it neatly before using it as if paper can be saved by making it smaller. Halfway through the bowl, she stopped. "Will there be more later?" she asked, balanced on a knife edge. "There will be more later," he said. "And tomorrow. And the day after. You don't have to ration here." She nodded like she was pinning the sentence to a wall in her head. When the bowls were empty, he rinsed them. "If you want," he said, "we can find you some clothes that aren't. Mine are too big, but I've got a t-shirt that could be a dress and joggers with a drawstring. Socks that don't have holes." And he opened a drawer, found a new toothbrush still in its wrapper. "This." She looked at the toothbrush the way you look at presents on TV because real life doesn't usually wrap things for you. She glanced toward the hall again. "Can I use the bath?" "Absolutely," he said, keeping his relief out of his voice. "Water as warm as you like. I'll be right out here." Steam fogged the mirror. He warmed the towels and set the shirt jogger's socks in a little stack, then backed out. When the bathroom door opened, Lila stood in a cloud of warmth, hair wet and combed with fingers, cheeks pink. The t-shirt reached her knees. The joggers bunched at her ankles, cinched to her size. She looked like a child again, not a shadow. The purple jacket was folded over her arm. He smiled before he could stop it. "There you are." She held the jacket tighter. "Can I keep this with me?" "Of course." He nodded. "You can keep anything with you want." He pulled down a small, clean backpack he'd bought for a nephew's visit that never happened. He set it on the table. "If you want to put your things in here, you can." She touched the zipper, slid it open, and tucked the jacket inside, then pulled it back out and hugged it again. "Maybe later," she said. "Maybe later," he agreed. On the end table sat a box of holiday string lights he'd never hung. He plugged them in, and a rope of soft gold pooled across the window, like a promise that didn't require words. Lila stared. "It's pretty." "Rachel loved lights," he said before thinking, and the name was in the air irrevocable. "Who's Rachel?" Her head tilted, curious, not prying. "Someone I loved," he said. "She died. A while ago." Lila's hand tightened around the jacket. "I'm sorry," she said, the kind of sorry that recognizes the shape of a hole. "Me too," he said. The truth sat between them, not a wall, just a thing. They both didn't have to pretend wasn't there. Her gaze slid to the doorway. "Do you think you could braid?" She lifted a section of wet hair. He almost laughed. "I can try. It might look like a road map drawn by a sleepy person." "That's okay." He sat on the couch arm and she sat below him straight-backed. He separated hair like threads of rain and fumbled until the pattern remembered itself. It wasn't good. It held. There, he said. She touched the crooked plait, and the smile reached both corners this time. Thank you. When she drifted to the window, he saw at the 2 rolls he'd set on the counter now inside the pouch pocket of the oversized t-shirt round shapes against the cotton. He said nothing. Later, he opened the pantry and left the door open, rows of cans and boxes in plain sight. He set a single apple on the table where a small hand could take it without crossing a line. You can take what you want, he said, not turning. We'll get more. How do you know? She asked. I'll make sure. Afternoon gathered without brightness. They watched a quiet cartoon with the sound low. She fell asleep for 20 minutes and woke with a start, gasping. He just said, "You're here." And the words made a fence around the room. When the sky went thin blue, he made grilled cheese again, because rituals teach the body it can count on certain songs. She ate 2 quarters and tucked a third into the pouch with the rolls. After dishes, after the second nap, that wasn't really a nap after the third, "Will you still be here?" And his third? Yes. He knew the next piece of track he had to lay. "Lila," he said, crouching so they were level. "I'm going to make some calls tonight to people who can help us figure out how to do this the right way. A friend. Some offices. I'll be right here the whole time. If anyone asks you questions you don't want to answer, you can look at me and I'll say so. Okay?" Her jaw set and he watched fear and relief collide. "Are they going to take me?" "Not if I have any say," he said. "The goal is to keep you safe. With me. While we make a plan." She thought, then nodded like she was giving permission to a pilot to take off in rough weather. Okay. He crossed to the side table where his phone sat, a black rectangle that hadn't called anyone that mattered in months. He scrolled to a contact he hadn't dialed in a year. Michael Klein. He glanced back at Lila. She had her feet tucked under her again, the string lights washing her in honeyed squares. She was looking at him the way people watched the tide ready to run if it rushed too fast, ready to breathe if it didn't. It's just a call, he said more to himself than to her. Just the next right thing. He pressed his thumb to the green circle and lifted the phone to his ear, the dial tone stepping across the distance between the life he had survived and the one he was about to build. The phone rang twice before a groggy voice broke through. "Cole. You realize what time it is?" Ethan almost hung up. He hadn't spoken to Michael Klein in nearly a year, not since he ducked out of dinner plans and let silence build walls between them. But now the voice of his old friend lawyer, steady hand, the kind of man who didn't flinch in storms, felt like oxygen. "Mike." "It's Christmas morning," Ethan said, pacing the kitchen floor. "Sorry to wake you." On the couch, Lila sat curled up with the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. She eyed the phone like it was a weapon. Ethan gave her a small nod as if to say, "It's okay. This is safe." Michael's sigh crackled through the line. "You haven't called in months, and when you do, it's at 2 a.m. "What's wrong?" Ethan pressed his palm to the counter, steadying himself. "I found a girl. Outside." She was digging through the trash. His throat tightened, but he forced the words out. 7 years old, alone, no parents, no one. I couldn't leave her there. There was a pause long enough that Ethan thought the call had dropped. Then Michael's voice, sharper now, lawyer mode, waking up. "She's with you." "Yes, sleeping here tonight. She's safe." He glanced at the couch. Lila's eyes were open, watching. He lowered his voice. "I need to know what I can do. What's legal? What's right?" Michael inhaled audibly. "You realize this isn't simple, Ethan. You can't just keep her. I'm not letting her go back out into the cold, not back to a system that keeps failing her. You know me, I wouldn't call if I wasn't serious." Silence then. "All right, tell me everything." Ethan recounted what little he knew, her grandmother Ruth, the sickness, the foster homes, the way no one wanted her. As he spoke, Lila's small fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket. He met her gaze, softening his tone when he said, "She's been alone. Too long." Michael sighed. "You'll need to contact the Department of Children and Family Services. They'll want to know she's with you. If you hide this, they'll assume the worst. I don't care how complicated it is. I'll do whatever they ask. Background checks, classes, whatever. I can't send her back." His voice cracked on the last word, and Lila looked down quickly, pretending not to notice. Michael's voice softened. Ethan, are you sure you're ready for this? After Rachel? Don't. Ethan cut in sharper than he meant. He pressed a hand to his eyes. Don't bring her into this. This isn't about what I lost. It's about what she's lost. And I won't be another person who walks away. The firmness in his voice silenced the line for a beat. Then Michael said, okay, if you're serious, I'll help. But be ready for the fight of your life. The system doesn't bend easily, especially for a single guy with no kids. I'm ready. When Ethan ended the call, the apartment felt too quiet again. He turned to see Lila sitting upright, eyes wide. You're still here, she whispered, almost as if she was testing him. Ethan nodded. I told you I wasn't going anywhere. But in the morning, won't they make me leave? He crossed the room, crouching beside her. In the morning, we're going to figure out how to make this work. You are not going back to sleeping in a basement or digging in dumpsters. Not while I'm here. Her small chest rose and fell quickly, her lips trembling. Then before he could react, she leaned forward and wrapped her thin arms around his neck. Ethan froze, then returned the embrace careful, as if she might break. But the truth was, it was him who felt fragile, cracking open after years of stone silence. You don't have to thank me, he murmured into her hair. We're just getting started. Later, when Lila drifted back into sleep, Ethan sat in the armchair again, staring out the window at the faint orange glow rising over rooftops. Snow flurries whispered against the glass, tiny sparks of white in the dark. For the first time since that hospital night, he felt alive. Not healed, not whole, but alive with purpose, with fire. He whispered to the empty room, to the morning that was just beginning. This time, I'm not losing her. The next morning crept in quietly, the gray light of winter filtering through thin curtains. Ethan hadn't really slept. He'd spent the hours half watching Lila breathe, half listening to the radiator knock like a stubborn heartbeat. When she stirred at last, stretching beneath the blanket, her eyes flickered open with a wild kind of alertness, like someone used to waking in places that weren't safe. But then she saw him still in the chair, head bowed, shoulders heavy, and her body eased. He was still there. The promise held. Morning, he said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. She nodded, sitting up slowly, rubbing her eyes. You didn't leave. I told you I wouldn't. A silence stretched between them. He didn't push it. She needed silence more than words. Sometimes he could already see that. After oatmeal and toast, simple warm filling, Ethan stood by the sink, turning over Michael's words in his head. Contact DCFS. Don't hide her. Do it the right way. His chest tightened. He had no idea what right even looked like anymore. Still, he knew he had to try. The first call to the department went straight to voicemail. The second sent him through a labyrinth of options. Lila sat on the couch, knees drawn up, watching him with hawk-like precision, as if the wrong word into that receiver might send her world collapsing again. When he finally reached a human voice, Ethan explained the girl the dumpster the night the story she'd told him. He spoke carefully, leaving out nothing but the raw ache in his chest. The voice on the other end sounded clinical, efficient. Sir, we appreciate you contacting us. In situations like this, we typically arrange temporary foster placement until further evaluation. She's been bounced around enough, Ethan said firmly. His eyes cut to Lila, her arms wrapped around her jacket like armor. She needs stability, not another stop. There was a pause. Do you intend to apply for guardianship? Yes. The word came out before he could second guess. His voice carried weight he hadn't felt in years. I want to keep her safe, as long as it takes. They rattled off requirements, background checks, home visits, parenting classes, therapy sessions. It sounded endless, designed to test every inch of his resolve. And yet as he hung up, Ethan felt only clarity. So be it. If this is what it takes, I'll do it all. When he set the phone down, Lila's voice broke the quiet. Are they going to take me away? He turned, meeting her gaze head on. Not if I can help it. You stay here with me while we figure this out. That's what I promised. Her chin trembled. They said that before. People said I could stay. And then I had to go. Ethan crossed the room, crouching until their eyes were level. Lila, I'm not like them. I won't disappear, Even if the system tries to move you, I'll fight to be wherever you are. You hear me, I won't walk away. For the first time, her eyes softened. Not completely, but enough to let a thread of trust slip through the cracks. That afternoon, Ethan started the first of the paperwork, his handwriting awkward on lines demanding things he hadn't thought about in years, references medical history, employment, stability. The pen felt heavy, but he pressed on. Meanwhile, life in the apartment began to stretch into rhythm. He showed her how to make grilled cheese properly, buttering the bread all the way to the edges. She laughed a short, startled laugh when the sandwich squeaked against the pan. He didn't realize until then how much he'd missed the sound of a child's laughter. But healing wasn't a straight line. That night he found her awake at 2 a.m., crouched by the pantry, stuffing crackers into her pockets. Her eyes flashed with panic when he caught her. Hey, he said quickly, kneeling beside her. It's okay, you don't have to hide it. Tears brimmed spilling before she could stop them. What if it's gone tomorrow? What if you change your mind? Ethan's heart cracked. He placed the box back gently on the shelf, then pulled out another and handed it to her. Keep it in your room. That way you'll know it's always there. She blinked at him through tears, confusion and relief tangling together. Really? Really? She tucked the crackers under her arm like treasure and slipped back to bed. Ethan leaned against the pantry doorframe long after staring into the shelves. He wasn't just fighting paperwork. He was fighting years of wounds carved into a child's trust. The days blurred into a fragile kind of routine. Oatmeal in the mornings. Walks to the corner store where Lila clung to his sleeve until she began slowly to let go. Evenings with cartoons low on the television, Lila leaning against him, though she pretended it was only because the couch cushions dipped in the middle. Every small gesture chipped away at the silence that had once filled his apartment. Every laugh, every cautious smile. Every night, he found her asleep with both shoes kicked to the floor. Each one breathed life into a home he'd thought was long dead. Still, when he opened the envelope with the first round of background check forms, his stomach clenched. He knew it was only the beginning. The system wouldn't make it easy. But as he looked at Lila tracing shapes in the fogged window with her finger, Ethan understood something she was worth every fight, every sleepless night, every memory he'd have to dredge up. He hadn't chosen this Christmas Eve, but maybe, just maybe, it had chosen him. By the end of the first week, Ethan's apartment looked less like a cave and more like a place where two people lived. The string light still curled in lazy gold across the window, and a pile of drawings, scribbled flowers, crooked houses. Stick figures holding hands began stacking on the fridge with magnets that hadn't held anything in years. But outside their little bubble, the world pressed in. Ethan could feel it every time the phone rang or another envelope slid under his door. Forms, interviews, background checks. His past, every scar, every debt, every closed door was now evidence to be measured. One evening, he sat at the table under the dim light while Lila-colored tongue peeking out in concentration. Across the page, a crayon sun blazed yellow, and beneath it a small figure with wild hair stood next to a taller one with tired eyes. Both were smiling. Ethan's chest tightened. He had no idea when she'd started drawing him, but there he was, standing in her fragile world of paper and wax, chosen without his permission. The knock came then, sharp official. Lila flinched, the crayon breaking in half under her grip. "It's okay," Ethan said quickly, squeezing her shoulder before crossing to the door. On the other side stood a woman in a dark coat, clipboard tucked beneath her arm. Her eyes swept him with the quick practiced judgment of someone trained to read lives at a glance. "Mr. Cole." "I'm Ms. Ramirez." "Social service." Ethan stepped aside. "Come in." Her gaze moved across the room like a searchlight. The tidy counters, the couch with its folded blanket, the little girl frozen in her chair. Lila's shoulders hunched, eyes darting for escape routes. "Hello, Lila, Ms." Ramirez said in a tone too practiced to sound real. "How are you?" The girl said nothing. Her fingers shredded the broken crayon. Ethan's instinct bristled. He crouched beside her. "It's okay. You don't have to answer if you don't want to." Ms. Ramirez's brow twitched, but she wrote something on her clipboard. "Mr. Cole, I'll need to ask you some questions about your background, employment, living situation." "Of course." He sat back down, answering everything steadily: his job at the security company, his income, his schedule. When she asked about family, his throat caught. He forced the words out. "I don't have any left." Her pen scratched the page. "And your history with loss, your wife and child." The words landed like stones. Ethan's jaw tightened. Lila looked up suddenly, alarm flashing in her eyes at the mention of death. He wanted to shut the subject down, to bury it like he always had, but this was part of the fight. He forced himself to speak. "Yes, 3 years ago. Complications during childbirth." The air thickened. Lila's hand crept across the table, brushing against his arm. It was quick, almost accidental, but he felt it. Her silent protest, her way of saying, "Don't let them see you break. I've been through loss." Ethan continued, his voice steadier now. "And I know what it does to a person, but I also know what it means to keep showing up. I'm not leaving her." Ms. Ramirez wrote more notes, her face unreadable. "We'll be in touch," she said, standing. Her heels clicked across the floor. "This process takes time. Nothing will be decided overnight." When the door closed, silence flooded back in. Ethan leaned against it, eyes shut. He'd expected resistance, but the cold weight of official judgment was heavier than he'd imagined. Lila's voice pulled him back. "Are they going to take me?" He opened his eyes. She sat stiff in the chair, arms wrapped around herself. The drawing crumpled in her hands. Ethan crossed the room and knelt in front of her. "I don't know how this will go, but I do know this. I'm going to fight with everything I've got to keep you safe." She studied him, searching for the weakness she'd seen in so many others. Finally, she whispered, "You mean it. I mean it." Her little body sagged, the fight draining just enough for her to lean into him. He wrapped his arms around her. Feeling the truth settle deep in his bones. He wasn't just filling out paperwork. He was undoing years of betrayal, proving every single day that he was different. That night, after Lila finally fell asleep, clutching the blanket to her chest, Ethan sat at the table alone, staring at the stack of forms. His pen hovered above the paper. He thought of Rachel's voice. "We're just having a baby, not defusing a bomb." He thought of the nursery, the strawberry hat, the door he'd closed and locked forever. And then he thought of Lila, her trembling hands, her cautious smile, her whispered, "You didn't leave." Ethan pressed the pen to the page and began to write. The fight was only beginning, but for the first time in years he wasn't afraid of the battle. He was afraid of losing her, and that fear was enough to drive him through every obstacle ahead. The weeks that followed blurred into a relentless rhythm of signatures, interviews, and waiting rooms. Ethan had never known paper could weigh so much. Every form asked him to prove his worth with dates, references, medical records, proof that he was more than the hollowed-out man he had been. He filled them all out at the kitchen table while Lila colored beside him, her crayons rolling between stacks of documents. Sometimes he caught her watching him as he wrote. Not suspicious this time, more like she was waiting to see if he'd push the papers aside, if he'd give up. Each time when he kept going, her shoulders loosened a little more. One Tuesday evening, they sat across from a therapist assigned by the court. Dr. Richards had kind eyes framed by glasses perched on the tip of her nose. She asked Ethan questions in a voice that could cut through defenses without ever raising in volume. "How are you managing grief while taking on the responsibility of a child?" Ethan swallowed hard. "Grief doesn't go away. It just changes its shape. But I know what it feels like to lose everything. That's why I can't let her feel that again. Not if I can help it." Beside him, Lila's small hand reached for his. She didn't speak, but her fingers twined with his in a grip that said more than any words could. At night, the healing wasn't linear. Some evenings, she would laugh at a silly story he told about high school or try to braid his hair while he read. Other nights, she woke screaming, her voice raw, reliving the morning she couldn't wake her grandmother. Ethan would rush in, sit on the floor beside her bed, and hold her hand until her breathing slowed. "You're safe, Lila," he whispered each time. "I'm right here." One night, after her third nightmare in a week, she looked at him with wide, wet eyes. "What if you don't wake up one morning, like Ruth?" The question pierced him. He took a long breath, choosing honesty without cruelty. "I can't promise I'll live forever, but I can promise this: I'm not going anywhere on purpose. I will fight for every day with you. You matter too much. She nodded slowly, clinging tighter. It wasn't the kind of answer that erased fear, but it was enough to help her drift back to sleep. On brighter days, there were breakthroughs. One Saturday, they made pancakes together. Batter ended up on the counter on her shirt, even on the floor. Ethan pretended outrage at the mess, and Lila laughed a real laugh, sharp and bright, the sound filling every corner of the apartment. It was the first time he had heard her laugh like that, unguarded. Ethan leaned against the counter, stunned by how much joy could live in a sound he'd almost forgotten existed. Later, she brought home a math quiz with a bright red A+ scrawled across the top. She pressed it into his hand, her eyes searching his face for approval. "Are you kidding?" he said, sweeping her up in a clumsy hug. "This is amazing, I'm framing it." She giggled, wriggling free. "You don't have a frame." "I'll buy one," he said. And he meant it. Still, the shadow of the system hovered. Ms. Ramirez returned for follow-ups, her clipboard always ready, her eyes sharp. She asked questions that made Lila shrink in her chair. Questions about where she'd slept, what she'd eaten before. Ethan answered firmly, sometimes too firmly. After each visit, when the door closed, he would find Lila watching him, waiting for cracks. And each time he crouched beside her and said the same words, "You're staying with me. We're a team." One evening after dinner, she surprised him. She climbed into his lap, small and tentative, and whispered, "Can I call you Dad?" The word nearly undid him. Tears blurred his vision, but he forced a steady smile. "You can call me anything you want, but I'd be honored to be your dad." She tried it out softly, testing the sound. "Dad?" He pressed his face into her hair, hiding the tears he couldn't hold back. For the first time in years, the word felt like a gift instead of a wound. Days later, Ethan found himself in another waiting room, this time for a parenting class the court required. He sat among strangers, single mothers, older couples, young parents with babies, and felt out of place. But when the instructor spoke about consistency, patience, and love as the foundation of parenting, Ethan felt Lila's hand in his, remembered the night she asked if he'd still be there when she woke, remembered the fear in her eyes at every knock on the door. Consistency, patience, love. He could do that. He was already doing it. By the time he walked out of the class, the night air biting his face, Ethan knew something with absolute clarity. This wasn't about proving himself to the system anymore. It was about proving to Lila over and over that she was worth choosing, and he was ready to keep proving it for as long as it took. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, the paper thin as skin and twice as cold. Ethan found it wedged beneath the door when he came back from the corner store with milk and a new frame for Lila's math quiz. Snow flurried sideways outside. Inside, the radiator clicked like an old pocket watch losing time. He opened the envelope carefully so the tearing wouldn't sound like something breaking. Lila watched from the table, a pencil hovering over her spelling list. He read the first paragraph and felt the floor tilt. "Proposed placement," he murmured. The words had the taste of metal. Lila's chair scraped. "What does that mean?" He kept his voice even. "It means the department is considering moving you to a licensed foster home while they sort things." The pencil slid from her fingers. She went very still, the stillness of someone bracing for a wave with nowhere to go. He set the letter down so she could see it was only paper. "It's a proposal, not a decision. Michael can file for an emergency hearing. We'll fight this." "You said I could stay," she whispered. "And I meant it," he said. "I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you do." He called Michael, the phone warm against his ear, while he watched Lila fold her hands until the knuckles blanched. Michael answered on the first ring. "I knew they might try this," Michael said. "They'll argue stability and licensing. We'll argue continuity of care attachment school improvement. I'll file for a temporary guardianship hearing by Friday." Friday. Ethan glanced at the calendar dotted with pencil stars for small victories. A full night's sleep, a laughter day, a new friend at school. That's 3 days. It's the system's pace, Michael said. In the meantime, comply with everything. Keep records, routines, school notes, therapy. Judges like paper in progress. After the call, the apartment felt too quiet. The winter light paneled Lila's face in pale squares. "I don't want to go," she said. Not pleading, just stating a fact about weather. "I know," he said. "I don't want you to go either." She picked up the pencil and wrote the word "stay" on the corner of her spelling list, then shaded each letter until it turned into a dark brick. That night, he packed a folder with proof of a life being built, the A-plus quiz. A note from her teacher, participating more, smiling, the parenting class certificate he'd tucked into a drawer, receipts for groceries with apple milk oatmeal circled. He added the photo he'd printed of the lopsided pancakes and their grins, the first picture he'd allowed into the apartment in years. Paper. In progress. Sleep thinned and snapped. Lila woke twice, breathing fast, her hands clawing at the blanket. He sat on the edge of the couch and counted her breaths with her until they slowed. At 4 a.m., he brewed coffee and rehearsed sentences. Continuity of care is in the child's best interest. Emergency guardianship is warranted due to established attachment. He could almost hear Rachel teasing him. "Look at you, counselor." He smiled, and the smile ached. The next morning, he walked Lila to school, the wind slicing seams. She held his sleeve to the door, then paused. "You'll be here after." "I'll be here," he said. She stood on tiptoe and pressed a quick, awkward kiss to his cheek, as if testing whether affection would make him vanish. He didn't. She went inside. By 9, Miss Ramirez was in his living room again, clipboard like a shield. "You received the notice," she said. "I did." Ethan replied calm because anything else would feed the wrong story. "For what it's worth," she said, eyes scanning the tidy counters, "I can see she's improving. But policy is policy. We have to consider licensed placements first." "Consider away," he said. "Meanwhile, I intend to be here when the considering is done." Something unreadable flickered across her face. "I'll note your cooperation," she said. "And your consistency." After she left, he called Dr. Richards. She picked up on the second ring. "I heard," she said. "News travels fast when a child is a file." "Will you write a letter," he asked, "about attachment and regression risk if she's moved?" "I will," she said. "And I'll be at the hearing if they'll have me." At 3, he stood outside the school, breath fogging like thought bubbles. Children spilled out in bright coats. Lila searched the crowd with eyes that leapt like startled deer. When she saw him, her shoulders dropped like tide. She ran the last few steps and stopped short, as if remembering the rules she'd set for her heart. "Still here," he said. "Still here," she echoed, slipping her hand into his like it had always been waiting there. They celebrated with hot cocoa that came out too sweet. She drew another picture, 2 people, a square window, little gold dots for lights. He slid it into the folder. Thursday brought a cold so sharp it made steel ring. Michael texted, "Hearing confirmed 10:15 Friday. Juvenile courtroom C." The words sat on the screen like coordinates to a cliff. That evening, as Ethan chopped carrots on a too small cutting board, Lila hovered near the stove. "If I have to go," she said, eyes on the pot. "Can I take the string lights?" He set the knife down. "Lila, I know," she rushed. "You're going to fight. But if I have to go, can I take them?" He swallowed. "If it comes to that, you can take anything you want." He touched a strand of hair that had escaped her braid. "But I'm fighting, so you don't have to pack anything." She nodded, accepting both realities the way only children and soldiers do. Friday morning, the courthouse rose from the sidewalk like a stack of gray decisions. Inside it smelled like old paper and winter coats. Michael met them by the metal detector tie, straight eyes, kind. "You ready?" he asked. Ethan looked down at Lila in her purple dress, the one he'd found at the thrift store, and ironed twice until it laid like a promise. She gripped the backpack strap with white knuckles. He squeezed her hand. "We're ready." They sat on a bench outside courtroom C. The hallway buzzed with murmurs, doors opening and closing, names called into air that refused to warm. Lila leaned her head against his elbow and counted the tiles between the bench and the far wall. When their case number flashed on the small screen, Ethan felt his mouth go dry. The door opened. Courtroom C waited. Courtroom C was colder than the street outside, though no snow touched the floor. The walls were paneled in dull oak, the lights too bright, the silence sharpened by the shuffle of papers and the occasional cough. Ethan walked in with Lila's hand folded in his throat tight, but his back straight. Michael strode ahead, calm as stone, a stack of files tucked under his arm. The judge. Patricia Hernandez. Her nameplate read, sat high on the bench, gray hair pinned neatly, glasses sliding down her nose. She didn't look unkind, but she didn't look moved either. Years in that chair had probably taught her to see every story twice, once in words, once in evidence. The bailiff called the case. Cole Ethan. Petition for emergency guardianship of minor Lila Mae Hart. The words rang too official for something that felt so fragile. Lila shrank closer to him, her small body pressed to his side like she could disappear into his coat. Ethan bent slightly, whispering, "We've got this. I'm right here." Michael began presenting documents, explaining the situation, his voice even but firm. He spoke of continuity of the child's best interest of the stability Ethan had already given. He handed over letters from teachers noting improvement in Lila's schoolwork, from Dr. Richards highlighting attachment progress from neighbors who'd seen the girl laughing on the stoop where once she'd hidden. The state's representative countered cool and clinical. While Mr. Cole's efforts are commendable, licensed foster care exists to provide children with trained families, vetted households, and monitored environments. He is a single man with no prior parenting experience. His recent history of grief raises concerns regarding emotional stability. The words slid like knives under Ethan's ribs. Grief always dragged into the light like a crime. He stared at the polished floor, feeling Lila's hand tighten in his. The judge's eyes flicked toward him. "Mr. Cole, would you care to respond?" He rose, his palms damp. "Your Honor," he began, his voice rough. "I won't pretend I haven't been through loss. 3 years ago I lost my wife and our son before he even had a chance to breathe. I shut down. I thought I was finished." He turned slightly, looking at Lila, her wide brown eyes locked on his. "And then I found her. Christmas Eve. Digging through trash, cold, hungry, alone. I saw myself in her, the same emptiness, the same abandonment. I knew I couldn't walk away." He swallowed words, dragging through the ache. "I don't claim to be perfect. But I can tell you what I've done. She sleeps in a warm bed now. She eats every day. She laughs. She calls me Dad." His voice cracked but didn't break. "She's not just surviving anymore. She's living, and so am I." A murmur rustled the courtroom, soft as fabric shifting. The state rep leaned forward. "Emotion, however compelling, does not replace structure. The department cannot allow precedent." That objection Michael cut in smoothly. "This isn't about precedent, it's about one child, about Lila. You've read the reports. She is thriving under Mr. Cole's care. Removing her now would risk re-traumatization, regression, and permanent trust issues. That's not theory, it's documented by Dr. Richards herself." All eyes turned to the therapist sitting in the second row. Dr. Richards rose, adjusting her glasses. "Your Honor, I've worked with traumatized children for 20 years. I can tell you plainly this child has formed a primary attachment to Mr. Cole. That bond is vital for her healing. Severing it would not only undo progress, it could cause damage that may never be fully repaired." The judge nodded slowly, her pen tapping once against her desk. Then she looked at Lila. "Young lady, would you like to say something?" Ethan bent down, whispering, "Only if you want to. You don't have to." Lila straightened. For a moment she seemed so small, dwarfed by the bench and the echo of the room, but then she stepped forward, her hands trembling, her voice clear enough to carry. "Your Honor," she said, "Ethan saved me. Not just the night he found me. Every day since then. He makes me oatmeal and he braids my hair even when it looks silly. He stays when I have nightmares. He doesn't walk away." Her eyes shone, but she didn't falter. "I know he's my real dad. Not because of papers, because he chose me, and he keeps choosing me every day." The silence that followed was thick, unbroken. Even the court reporter seemed to pause. Ethan felt tears blur his vision. He pressed his hand against his mouth, trying to keep the flood inside. But the truth of her words cracked something open in him. The judge cleared her throat, her voice softer now. "Thank you, Lila." She glanced at the papers spread before her, then back at the man and the girl standing together at the front of her court. "Mr. Cole," she said, "whatever my ruling, know this. Your devotion is evident." Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. This was the edge of the cliff. Judge Hernandez lifted the gavel, her expression unreadable. "The decision will be delivered tomorrow morning." The gavel struck once, sharp and final. The room stirred back to life, but Ethan stood rooted, Lila's hand clutching his. Tomorrow felt like an ocean he'd have to cross blindfolded. But when he looked down at her, her trust steady in her gaze, he knew no matter what that ocean held, he would swim until his lungs gave out. The courthouse emptied like a drained river, footsteps echoing against stone floors. Ethan and Lila stepped into the hallway, the heavy oak door closing behind them with a thud that seemed to reverberate through his chest. His palms were damp, his tie loose, but his grip on Lila's hand was firm. She leaned into his side, her backpack strap digging into her shoulder, her purple dress swishing against her knees. Michael caught up to them, his face carved with tired lines, but steady as ever. "You did well," he said, lowering his voice. "Both of you." "Tomorrow," Ethan muttered. "We have to wait until tomorrow." Michael placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's how this works. The judge has to review everything, reports testimony, her own conscience. But listen, Ethan, I've seen plenty of cases." The way she looked at Lila. That mattered. Ethan nodded, though his stomach felt like a pit. He wasn't sure he could survive another night of waiting. Outside, the winter air slapped cold against their faces. Snow had stopped, leaving the sidewalks slick with slush. Ethan bent and zipped Lila's coat to her chin. "You okay?" She nodded, eyes solemn. "You promised you'd be here in the morning." "And I will be," he said. "We'll face whatever comes together." They walked home slowly. The city light smudged in puddles, the hum of passing cars filling the silence. Lila held his hand all the way to the building's front door, only letting go to climb the steps 2 at a time, as if racing against something invisible. That night Ethan couldn't eat. He reheated soup set bowls on the table, but barely touched his. Lila picked at hers too, her appetite dulled by the uncertainty pressing on them both. Later, she curled on the couch under the blanket, her eyes wide open in the dark. "What if she says no?" Ethan knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair back. "Then we fight again, and again, until we win." She studied his face, her small fingers reaching for his. "You really mean that?" "With everything in me," he said. When she finally fell asleep, Ethan sat in the armchair staring at the glowing string lights they had left plugged in by the window. Each bulb pulsed softly, a fragile constellation. He thought of Rachel, how she had loved Christmas lights, how she said they were proof that even in the darkest nights, light insists on being seen. He closed his eyes, whispering to her memory, "I'm doing it, Rach. I'm trying again." Morning arrived in a haze of nerves. They dressed quietly. Ethan in his best shirt, Lila in the purple dress again, her hair in 2 braids that curved like uneven lines of courage. She stuffed a crayon drawing into her backpack, whispering to herself that maybe she could show the judge. The courthouse felt heavier this time, the air denser, every echo amplified. Families shuffled in and out, lawyers murmured, guards leaned on walls. Inside courtroom C, Judge Hernandez sat with her papers stacked neatly, her gavel resting like a sleeping hammer. The air vibrated with tension. "All rise," the bailiff called. The words clanged like bells. They stood, hands clasped, eyes forward. Ethan's throat was dry, but he squeezed Lila's hand until she looked up at him, and he gave her the smallest nod he could manage. The judge adjusted her glasses, eyes moving over the room before settling on them. "I have reviewed all documents, testimonies, and evaluations regarding the petition for emergency guardianship of minor Lila Mae Hart." Ethan's chest constricted. He felt Lila's small hand tremble in his. The judge continued, her voice calm but weighted. "This case is unusual. A single man with no previous children requesting to become guardian of a child he encountered under extraordinary circumstances. Normally, protocol would dictate licensed foster care. However," her pause stretched like an eternity, "this court does not deal in protocols alone. We deal in children and lives. The reports are consistent under Mr. Cole's care. The child has demonstrated significant improvement, academic, emotional, psychological." Testimony from Dr. Richards confirms that a primary attachment has formed. Removing her at this juncture would, in the court's judgment, cause undue harm. Ethan's knees almost buckled. He gripped the table for balance. Therefore, Judge Hernandez concluded this court grants temporary guardianship to Mr. Ethan Cole, with review scheduled in 6 months. During this period, he will comply with all evaluations, continue therapy and parenting classes, and provide regular reports to social services. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Lila gasped, eyes wide. She turned to Ethan. That means, I get to stay. He bent low, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, Lila, you get to stay. She threw her arms around his neck, clinging tight. For the first time in years, Ethan let the tears fall freely, unashamed. Michael leaned over, whispering, This is just the first step, but it's the step that matters most. Ethan nodded, holding Lila close, the weight of the judge's words sinking in. Not forever yet, but for now, for today, for tomorrow. For Christmases to come, she was his, and he was hers. The courthouse steps were slick with ice, but Ethan hardly felt the cold as he carried Lila down in his arms. She clung to his neck, her purple dress bunched under her coat, her face pressed against his shoulder. The city swirled around them, traffic honking horns, strangers in heavy boots. But for the first time in years, the world didn't feel like it was crushing him. Michael followed close behind, tucking his gloves on. Temporary guardianship isn't forever, he reminded gently, though even his steady lawyer's tone cracked at the edges. But you won the most important battle today. Judges don't grant that unless they see something undeniable. Ethan nodded, his voice rough. She saw us. They reached the sidewalk and Ethan set Lila down carefully. She slipped her hand into his without hesitation this time, like she'd been waiting all along to make that choice. Can we go home now? She asked, her eyes wide, hopeful. Home, Ethan echoed. The word filled his chest in a way it hadn't since the nursery walls were painted yellow. Yeah. Let's go home. Dut. The weeks that followed moved like thawing ice, slow, hesitant, but forward. Social workers still visited, jotting notes on clipboards, peering into cupboards, counting toothbrushes. Dr. Richards came weekly, sitting cross-legged on the floor with Lila as she drew pictures of houses with two figures holding hands. Teachers reported steady progress, better focus, louder, laughter. But more powerful than any report were the moments Ethan witnessed at home. The night Lila fell asleep with her head in his lap during a movie, breathing steady, untroubled. The morning she left a note on the fridge written in wobbly letters, "Don't forget breakfast, Dad." The afternoon she handed him a braided bracelet made of purple yarn, saying shyly, "So you don't forget me when you're at work." Each gesture pressed deeper into his heart, each one chiseling away the years of silence and grief. Still healing carried shadows. Some nights Lila woke crying, clutching her chest as if her heart itself hurt. Ethan would sit on the floor beside her bed, murmuring, "I'm here. I'm not leaving." He repeated it until she finally believed enough to sleep again. And Ethan, though he never admitted it, sometimes dreamed of Rachel. In his dreams, she stood in the nursery, her hands smoothing the yellow walls, her smile soft. When he woke, it was to the sight of Lila curled beneath her blanket, breathing softly. Somehow, the ache of loss felt less like a wound and more like a reminder he had been given a second chance. One evening after dinner, Lila set down her fork and looked at him with surprising seriousness. "Dad." The word still jolted him every time, sweet, fragile, weighty. "Yeah. Do you think Ruth would like you?" Ethan blinked. He hadn't expected that. "I'd like to think so. She always wanted me to have someone who stayed. I think she'd be glad." Her voice faltered, but her eyes held steady. Ethan swallowed hard. "Then I'll do everything I can to make her glad." She slid off her chair and hugged him, small arms tight around his waist. He rested his chin on her hair, the smell of strawberry shampoo rising like memory and promise. Spring crept in slowly, the day's lengthened sunlight stretching across the floor in golden panels. On weekends, Ethan and Lila planted flowers in mismatched pots on the balcony. She insisted on purple pansies because they looked like little faces. Together they dug, watered, and waited. One Saturday, Ethan watched her crouched among the pots, humming to herself, dirt streaked across her cheek. The sight hit him with sudden clarity. This was family. Not the one he'd planned, not the one he'd lost, but the one he'd been given. Rachel's voice whispered in memory, "Families are what you build, not just what you're born into." He wiped his hands on his jeans, his throat thick. "Hey, Lila." She looked up, squinting against the sun. "Yeah, I just want you to know, You saved me. Her brow furrowed. I didn't do anything. You did everything he said quietly. You gave me a reason to wake up again, a reason to fight, a reason to live. She stared at him for a moment, then broke into a crooked smile. Well, you saved me first, so I guess we're even. They laughed, the sound bright and unguarded, rising into the afternoon air. That night, Ethan tucked her into bed, brushing hair from her forehead. She clutched her purple jacket, now faded but still her anchor, and whispered, You'll be here in the morning, right? As long as I have breath, he said, always. She sighed, her eyes fluttering closed. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed a moment longer, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. He thought of the journey, the dumpster, the courtroom, the folder of papers, heavy with evidence, and realized that the real proof of their bond wasn't in forms or signatures. It was in this moment, in the simple trust of a child who finally believed he would stay. Tomorrow would bring more battles, home visits, evaluations, the looming 6-month review. But tonight, in the quiet glow of the string lights she'd insisted on hanging in her room, Ethan allowed himself to believe in something he hadn't in years. A future. Not perfect, not easy, but theirs. Summer sunlight slanted through the blinds, painting the floor in wide stripes. 6 months had passed since that cold Christmas Eve when Ethan found Lila at the dumpster. 6 months of mornings and nights of school lunches packed with careful notes of bedtime routines, stitched together with lullabies he made up on the spot. 6 months of proving to the system and to himself that he could be a father. The 6-month review loomed like a storm cloud. Papers, reports, evaluations, all collected, stamped, judged. Yet, as Ethan watched Lila chase bubbles across the small patch of grass outside their building, her laugh ringing like wind chimes, he knew what no paper could prove: they were already family. Inside, a new picture hung on the fridge. 2 figures holding hands beneath a house with crooked curtains. Above it, in careful block letters, she had written, Me plus Dad equal home. He touched the drawing every morning before leaving for work. Courtroom C again. This time the air felt heavier, charged with anticipation. Judge Hernandez sat at her bench, flanked by files stacked high. Michael whispered final reminders. Answer directly. Keep calm. Let them see consistency. The state representative spoke first. While Mr. Cole has demonstrated care for the child, concerns remain. He is a single man with limited support networks. Guardianship is not to be granted lightly. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his gaze steady. Lila sat beside him, her small hand folded in his. Michael rose. Your Honor, the department's own reports note academic improvement, emotional stability, and consistent care. This isn't a case of a temporary rescuer. This is a father choosing his child every day. We ask the court to recognize what already exists: a family. Judge Hernandez turned to Ethan. Mr. Cole, do you have anything to add? Ethan stood heart pounding. Your Honor, I don't have the perfect resume. I can't offer 2 parents a big house or years of experience. But what I can offer is this: I will never leave her. She will never wonder if she matters. I lost my family once. I know the cost. I won't let her pay it again. His voice trembled, but his words did not. Then the judge looked to Lila. Lila, would you like to say something? The little girl stood smoothing the skirt of her purple dress. She clutched a piece of folded paper, unfolded it with trembling hands, and began to read. Your Honor, she said, her voice small but strong. I used to think nobody wanted me. I thought I'd always have to move from house to house. But then Ethan found me. He gave me food. He gave me warmth. He gave me love. He stayed. And he keeps staying. Her eyes lifted, shining. He's my dad. Please let me stay his daughter. A hush blanketed the room. Even the court reporter paused, her fingers hovering over the keys. Judge Hernandez's expression softened, the gavel heavy in her hand. She looked from the child to the man, then down at the files, then back again. In my 15 years on this bench, she said, I've seen too many cases where children are treated like files instead of lives. This is not one of them. Mr. Cole, you may lack a conventional family structure, but what I see here is something far more vital: commitment, love, and trust. She lifted the gavel. Therefore, I hereby grant full and permanent adoption. Ethan Cole, you are now the legal father of Lila Hart, who from this day forward will be known as Lila Cole. The gavel struck, echoing like thunder through the chamber. Lila's gasp filled the silence. Did she say forever? Ethan knelt, tears streaming openly. Forever, sweetheart. She threw her arms around his neck, and in that embrace 3 years of grief melted into something fierce and alive. Michael grinned, clapping Ethan's shoulder. Congratulations, Dad. The word landed like a crown, heavy and beautiful. That evening, they celebrated with Chinese takeout in paper cartons, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor. Lila presented him with a crayon drawing she'd made in secret. 2 figures stood in front of a house with yellow curtains under a banner that read, "My Family Forever." Ethan taped it to the fridge beside the others, his throat too tight for words. He knelt in front of her, his hand steady on her cheek. "You gave me back my life, Lila," he whispered, "and I'll spend every day making sure you know how loved you are." She leaned against him, eyes closing, her voice soft but certain. "Thanks for not walking away." Ethan kissed the top of her head, the string lights glowing gold above them. For the first time in years, the world felt whole. Autumn swept into the city with crisp winds and trees burning amber at their edges. For Ethan and Lila, the season carried a new weight, not the heaviness of uncertainty, but the grounding of permanence. No more temporary, no more waiting for the next shoe to drop. She was his daughter now, in every way the law and the heart could define. The rhythm of their lives settled into something steady, something ordinary. And it was in that ordinariness that Ethan found himself healing. Mornings began with cereal bowls and hurried braids, Lila insisting she could do them better than Dad. Afternoons brought homework sprawled across the kitchen table, Ethan learning 4th grade math all over again, groaning dramatically when she corrected him. Evenings meant string lights twinkling against windows, stories read aloud, and laughter bouncing off the walls. It wasn't grand, it wasn't picture perfect, but it was theirs. Yet, one Saturday, Ethan took Lila to the park. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke. Children's laughter rang from the swings, and golden leaves skittered across the ground. "Push me higher," she called from the swing, her hair flying behind her like a banner. "Any higher, and you'll end up in the next county," he teased, giving her another push. She laughed loud and free, and the sound carved something open in him. For years, laughter had been a ghost in his home. Now it was his anchor. When she hopped off the swing landing with both feet planted, she grinned up at him. "See?" Stuck the landing. "You're braver than I ever was," he said, ruffling her hair. "You had to be brave too," she replied. "You found me." Her words sank deep, almost too heavy to carry. He crouched down, looking her in the eyes. "Finding you was the bravest and best thing I've ever done." She smiled a little shy and slipped her hand into his. But healing is never linear. That night, Lila woke crying, the sound raw and jagged. Ethan rushed into her room to find her sitting up, clutching her jacket to her chest. "They'll take me again," she sobbed. "Someone's going to take me away." Ethan sat beside her, pulling her close until her shaking quieted. "No one's taking you, Lila. Not now, not ever. You are mine forever. The judge said it. The papers say it. But most of all, I say it." She sniffled, burying her face in his chest. "Promise on everything I've got," he whispered. It took a long time, but eventually her breathing slowed, her body relaxing against him. Ethan stayed until she fell asleep, then sat in the chair by her bed, watching the glow of string lights twinkle across her hair. The fear was still there, lingering in shadows, but it no longer had the power to win. Weeks later, Dr. Richards invited Ethan into her office alone after a session with Lila. Her voice was calm but firm. "You've done more than provide shelter and food," she said. "You've given her trust. That's something the system rarely repairs. She believes you'll stay. That belief will shape the rest of her life." Ethan nodded, swallowing the tightness in his throat. "She gave me the same thing. I didn't realize how badly I needed to be trusted again, or to trust myself." Dr. Richards smiled knowingly. "Sometimes we don't rescue them. Sometimes they rescue us." Thanksgiving arrived with the smell of turkey and cinnamon drifting from every window in the building. Ethan wasn't much of a cook, but he tried anyway, nearly burning the rolls and laughing when Lila declared the mashed potatoes too lumpy, but still edible. After dinner, they sat on the couch, plates of pie balanced on their laps. Lila leaned against him, her voice soft. Dad? Yeah, I'm thankful you found me. The words cracked him wide open. He kissed the top of her head, tears pressing at his eyes. I'm thankful you let me. Later that night, after she was asleep, Ethan stood in the quiet kitchen gazing at the fridge. The drawings, the notes, the adoption certificate pinned with a magnet. It was a mosaic of proof. Proof of love, proof of belonging, proof of a family, made not by blood, but by choice. He touched the paper that read, My family forever, and whispered into the stillness. We're going to be okay, Rachel. She's ours now. For the first time since that rainy March years ago, the memory didn't hollow him out. It steadied him. He turned off the light, letting the glow of the string lights carry the room. Upstairs, his daughter slept safe and certain she would not wake to loss. And Ethan Cole, once a broken man, stood whole again, not because the world had spared him, but because love had found him when he least expected it. December rolled in again, crisp and sharp, as though the year had come full circle. Snow dusted the sidewalks, frosting rooftops and muffling the hum of the city. For Ethan, each swirl of white against the night air was a reminder. 12 months ago, he had been walking out into the cold, convinced Christmas Eve would be just another night of silence. Instead, he had found Lila. Or maybe she had found him. The apartment was no longer bare. Drawings lined the fridge, potted plants crowded the windowsill, and a small Christmas tree glittered in the corner strung with ornaments they'd picked out together from a thrift store bin. Lila had insisted on a crooked star at the top, laughing when it leaned sideways. It's okay, she said, because we're a little crooked too, but we still shine. Ethan smiled every time he looked at it. On Christmas Eve, they baked cookies, though the kitchen looked more like a flower storm had swept through. Lila wore one of his old shirts as an apron sleeves rolled to her elbows, her hands dusted white. Careful, Ethan said as she shoveled dough onto a tray. Careful is boring, she countered, grinning. He laughed, shaking his head, feeling the weight of grief melt into something lighter. For the first time in years, the holiday didn't ache, it glowed. When the cookies cooled, Lila brought 2 plates to the couch and set them carefully. Tradition, she declared. Cookies and hot cocoa on Christmas Eve. New tradition, Ethan corrected, taking a bite. Our tradition. Her eyes flickered to him, warm, certain. Ours. Later that night, as the snow thickened outside, Lila padded into the living room holding her purple jacket. It was faded now, frayed at the sleeves, but she still kept it close. Can I tell you something? She asked quietly. Of course. She sat beside him, the jacket bunched in her lap. When Ruth died, I thought no one would ever want me again. I thought I'd just disappear. Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. But you didn't let me. You saw me. Ethan's chest tightened. He pulled her close, his arm wrapping around her shoulders. I'll never stop seeing you, Lila. Not for a single day. She leaned against him, whispering, That's the best Christmas gift. He kissed the top of her head. You're mine, kiddo. Forever. At midnight, as the city fell silent under snow, Ethan watched Lila sleep curled beneath her blanket, her face soft and peaceful. He thought of the man he had been a year ago, lonely, broken, convinced his story was over. But fate or grace, or maybe just a moment of courage, had brought him here. To her. To family. He whispered into the stillness, Thank you. He wasn't sure if he was speaking to Rachel, to Ruth, to God, or to the night itself, maybe to all of them. The lights on the tree blinked steadily, a heartbeat in the dark, and Ethan knew as certain as he knew the weight of his daughter's hand in his that the coldest night of his life had given him the warmest gift he could ever receive. Snow fell in thick, lazy spirals outside the window, the world softened under a white blanket. Inside the apartment glowed warm with string lights and the faint scent of cinnamon lingering from cookies baked the day before. Ethan stood at the stove, stirring oatmeal, listening to the faint hum of holiday music playing from the old radio on the counter. Behind him, Lila padded out of her room hair mussed, wearing the oversized t-shirt she loved as pajamas. She rubbed her eyes, then smiled when she saw him. Morning, Dad. The word still struck Ethan every time, like a bell rung deep in his chest. He turned, grinning. Morning, kiddo. Hungry always, she said, plopping onto a chair at the table. He set the steaming bowl in front of her, topping it with honey. She leaned over, inhaling with exaggerated delight. Best chef ever. Ethan chuckled, sitting across from her. Don't let Gordon Ramsay hear you say that. She laughed, spoon clinking against the bowl, and the sound filled the room with something more powerful than any music. After breakfast, Lila tugged on her jacket, the same purple one she had clutched the night he found her. It was worn thin now, seams fraying, but she refused to give it up. Ethan had bought her a new one, a bright blue coat with deep pockets, but she wore the purple underneath like armor. When he asked why, she had answered simply, "It reminds me of where I came from and how you found me." Today she layered both jackets, tugging at the sleeves as they stepped outside into the sparkling snow. The city was quieter on Christmas morning. Streets hushed, shop windows dark. Lila held Ethan's hand, her boots crunching alongside his. They walked to the park, the same one where she had swung so high she declared herself fearless. Today the swings sagged with snow, but she laughed anyway, running to leave boot prints in untouched drifts. "Come on, Dad," she called, waving him over. "You're too slow." Ethan jogged after her, breath rising in clouds. He tackled her gently into a snowbank, and her shrieks of laughter rang out, bouncing off the bare trees. Snow clung to her braids, her cheeks flushed bright pink. For a moment, Ethan closed his eyes, breathing it in. Her joy, his joy. The impossible second chance life had handed him in the form of a shivering little girl by a dumpster 1 year ago. That evening, they sat together on the couch, the Christmas tree glowing with its crooked star. Lila leaned against Ethan, her head resting on his chest, a book open in her lap. "Dad," she murmured. "Yeah. Do you ever think about, what if you hadn't seen me that night?" The question hit him like cold water. He tightened his arm around her. "I don't let myself think about it, because I did see you, and it changed everything." She tilted her head up, eyes wide. "For me too." Ethan kissed her forehead, his voice rough. "Lila, sometimes the family we need most is the one we never saw coming. You saved me just as much as I saved you." Her lips curved into a sleepy smile. "Guess we saved each other." "Yeah," he whispered. "We did." Later, when she was tucked into bed, Ethan stood in the doorway, watching her breathe. The string light she insisted on keeping up all year bathed the room in soft gold. He thought of Rachel, the nursery painted yellow, the strawberry hat folded in a drawer. He thought of Ruth, a grandmother who had loved fiercely until she could love no more. And he thought of Lila, the girl who had turned his hollow apartment into a home. Ethan whispered into the quiet, "Thank you for letting me stay." Outside, snow fell steady, endless. Inside, warmth pulsed like a heartbeat. The man who had once walked alone into a frozen night now had someone waiting for him in the morning. The little girl who had once searched trash for scraps now had a father who would fight the world to keep her safe. And together they had built something unbreakable from the broken pieces of their lives. Not by blood, not by chance, but by choice, by love, forever. Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories. And if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you, we listen to you, and we are honored to tell these stories for you.